On October 13th, in 2019, true crime podcaster Freedy Stockton disappeared. 3 weeks later, this video appeared online for 6 minutes before being deleted entirely. The blade traced my neck like a cold microphone wire. Familiar but wrong. One midnight howls, he whispered it, and I recognized those words from episode 47, The Midnight Butcher, and Matt had edited out my gasp when I first read them, and now I couldn't edit anything out. Last night felt impossible. Matt bringing me coffee at 3 a.m., kissing my coffee bitter lips, saying, "Almost done, love." His kindness had been such a shield, and now it was going to be another weapon that this man could use. My phone would be ringing by now. Matt always called at 8:03, enough time to know that I wasn't just stuck on the subway. So he'd call twice, and then he'd call the police. And this routine I teased him about might actually save my life right now if I lived that long. Footsteps echoed down this concrete corridor. They were measured, they were deliberate. They were dress shoes on stone. Click, click. Each step closer than the last, and this warehouse air, it hit my lungs like old bones. It was stale, it was forgotten, and his breath found my neck. Copper sweet. And above us, these chains swayed, but without wind, and their shadows were dancing across my skin. I could see it like cemetery gates. Well, hello there. His breath hit my neck like January air, his exhale measuring the seconds until he decided to kill me, or just to take another one of his breaths. The scream I had died in my throat. It was becoming something so much worse. It was a whimper, and it reminded me of all the victims from my podcasts. The ones that I would analyze so clinically, and I never really understood them until right now. His fingers found my pulse. These scarred knuckles were pressing on my skin. One hand of his could circle my entire throat. I remembered the crime scene photos. Every single victim, they looked so small against these huge concrete walls. They were just like these walls. I had watched these walls. I'd watched it all before. This building, it seemed to lean closer the more I realized it. It was hungry for one more of my stories. His nails traced patterns on my scalp. They were these circles. They were symbols. They must have been plans. The tape came off of my mouth like a gunshot. My scream followed. It was raw. It was animal. It was completely useless. The scream that I would have described in 100 different episodes, now finally understanding it, that no one was actually coming. Scream all you want. He pressed that blade deeper. Make it good for your listeners. His voice turned playful. Your listeners love screams, don't they? All those true crime stories, all those victims. Well, now you're just another voice in the dark. No one here but us. He whispered it to me, just like your stories. Except this time, you're not the one telling it. Tears started just to track down my face like evidence markers. They were salty against my lips. My voice cracked like a victim's final interview. Look, I tell stories about people like you, okay? I'm not supposed to become one. Stories. The blade pressed deeper on me. Let's see what kind of ending you deserve. The light suddenly flickered on. These lights buzzed to life. They were sickly yellow like old crime scene photos. And he filled the doorway. Prison tattoos climbing his neck. Face pitted like bullet holes. The ponytail made him look almost normal. And that was worse. Something about him nagged at my memory. It was like a detail that I'd missed in one of my cases. The kind that gets people killed. Memory's a funny thing. His smile widened like a wound. Let me help you with yours. Metal suddenly scraped behind me, and when he returned, my own voice filled the darkness, but tinny through laptop speakers. Confident. Wrong. Nick Bresden, my recorded voice announced. Shows all the signs of a serial killer. I watched his face as my words played back. His scars now seemed even deeper in the screen's blue light. Nick's just another lonely man who turned his self-hatred into murder. No friends, no relationships, just a shadow watching others live. This was his way of making the world notice him. But here's the truth about Nick Bresden, okay? He's not the predator that he thinks he is. He's just another broken man trying to make his pain feel important. And then the screen went dark, and Nick's smile never did. Oh, you remember me now, huh? Look, Megan wrote that script. I said my voice had the same tremor that I'd analyzed in countless victim interviews. But you said it. Look, New York rent keeps us so desperate, and plus my wedding and the podcast barely pays the bills, okay? We need episodes, we need clicks, we need content. My voice caught as I realized that each stupid excuse was making him smile even wider. Even now, I was treating this like just another episode, like just one more story to tell. And his laugh cut me off. Poor little podcaster, selling others people pain to pay rent. I just read the scripts, I whispered. I never thought about the people. I'm gonna take it down. My voice cracked. I will stop at everything. You liar. The word hit me like a slap. It was the same way my mother used to call me when I'd hide my bad report cards. You know, I hadn't realized Mom had been so mean until right now. The truth spilled out of me like confessions, each word making his smile wider. You turned people's nightmares into entertainment, he said, pacing like a prosecutor. You made their pain pay your rent. I'm sorry, I whispered. The words felt so hollow, like everything else I'd ever said into a microphone up until this very point. Sorry. His laugh turned sharp. You are only sorry because the monster finally found you. And that truth caught in my throat like Sunday confessions. The blade found my pulse, cold as winter steel. Now you want truth. His breath hit my ear. Your listeners missed the best part. You thought I was just another lonely man with a knife, right? His smile widened. Let me show you what I really am. The blade kissed my palm, blood purled and then flowed, and each cut followed this map. I'd seen him before. It was the same pattern from victim photos. I'd studied it in my safe bedroom. Outside, thunder cracked like breaking bones, and the warehouse walls caught my whimpers and threw them right back at me, multiplied, like it was collecting screams. My bones sang with each stroke, white-hot lightning pain racing through my hand, and the cuts formed a perfect circle, a signature he'd clearly practiced many times on many hands. The room was suddenly swimming. These black spots were dancing, and then I saw what he had drawn. It was the circle. It completed itself into something even darker. The points and the curves from the cases that I never dared to cover. Nick raised that blade to his lips. My blood stained his teeth red. The world breaks everyone, he whispered. I just learned to break back. You thought I only hunted women? His smile widened. Pain doesn't discriminate. Neither do I. His eyes locked onto mine. When the midnight howls. And those words hung there like a noose. When the midnight howls. His voice turned all gentle. It was like a teacher waiting. And the words came uninvited. The butcher awakes. It was like a Sunday school verse I couldn't forget. Good girl. His smile split wider. I've been waiting so long to hear you say that. The Midnight Butcher. 5 victims found in New York shadows. I'd studied every single detail. I was never thinking I'd become one. And he would keep them alive while he worked. And that's what made him so different. That's what made him so much worse. Each victim lasted hours after he finished. Their skin beside them like empty clothes. And their screams were echoing until their voices just gave out completely. And his blade dripped my blood onto the floor now. Each drop marking time until the real performance began. Bile burned my throat, and through my tears, I saw Nick's smile widen even more. I can't tell your story, I whispered. The real story. Everyone would finally understand you. story. His voice turned playful, dangerous. You're not the narrator anymore. You're just a first chapter. Wood groaned against metal behind me, and glass caught the moonlight, a picture frame I knew without even seeing it. Our Tuscany photo. Matt's nervous smile, my wind-blown hair. His hands had trembled holding the ring that day, and now mine trembled seeing the photo right here. He hadn't just invaded our home. He'd stolen our happiest moment. He made it part of his collection. Your keys led me right home, he said. Matt was making dinner. Pasta, actually. Such a thoughtful husband. One word about you and he did everything I asked. He's in the next room now. Still warm pasta on the table. Matt's face in Tuscany flashed through my mind, and not our proposal, but the night before, when he'd caught me researching murders at 3 a.m. There was no judgment, there was just coffee and his shoulder against mine, and I'd always worried that my dark stories would somehow follow me home. Now they had, straight to our kitchen, to his pasta sauce and humming. Nick watched me, waiting for tears or rage. Instead, something cold settled in my chest, something that reminded me of every single victim interview. Your mother, I said. She's the one who taught you about pain, isn't she? Shut up. Parents leave the deepest scars. My voice stayed so steady, like I was confessing my sins on Sunday. Was it her kitchen knives that you started with? Or did she use them first? The blade kissed my throat, right where my microphone usually sat. A playing therapist, it won't save you, he hissed. His hand trembled on the blade, though. I know about rage, I whispered. About wanting the world to hurt like you hurt. Every Sunday confession begging God to bring them back. Every birthday candle wish wasted on the impossible. Every night jumping at car brakes, squealing. The world breaks us all, I said. But breaking others, it won't fix what's broken in you. Nick's eyes softened. Maybe you understand. After all, his voice, false, gentle, like funeral comfort, his gentle mask cracked. Sweet little therapist, he sneered. You're still selling stories to save yourself. I just kept talking. I was watching his eyes, not the shadow moving behind him, but each word was another second that Matt needed. The darkness that he had chosen as a weapon was betraying him now. He couldn't see what I could. The movement in the shadows. Metal glinted in the dark, but it wasn't Nick's blade. It was Matt's. A quick flash and darker stain spreading. Nick touched his arm and his smile never faltering, and his fist found Matt's jaw, and the knife skittered away into shadow, and they dove for the blade, and Nick's fingers closed on the steel, but Matt's weight pinned his arm down to the concrete. Matt's hand found Nick's ponytail, and one savage yank and the killer's head snapped back, and the blade came free. Matt's knee found Nick's chest, pinning him to the concrete, and steel kissed Nick's belly, right where he'd marked his other victims. Nick's smile widened under the blade. Sweet Matt, he whispered, you still can't hurt anyone, can you? Matt raised that blade. My fiancé's hands that made me coffee each morning now was trembling with purpose, and that blade fell rose red, fell again. Each strike a confession. Blood painted that concrete in brutal brushstrokes, and the midnight butcher becoming just another red stain. His final masterpiece written in his own crimson. Blood and tears streaked my cheeks, but Matt's hands were steady now as they found my face, and his touch was gentle against mine, like nothing had changed. Everything had changed. The ropes fell away, and my wrists bore his signature, circles that would scar like wedding rings. Moonlight pierced the boarded windows, turning that blood to black ink on concrete, and Matt's shoulder met the wood. Once, twice, and suddenly night air rushed in like salvation. We ran through Poughkeepsie's shadows, past the sleeping houses and the dark church, toward light that meant safety, toward explanations, toward true stories that I'd have to tell. And this would normally be where I tell you that I'll see you next week. But see, this will be my last episode, not because the darkness won, not at all, but because I finally understand what these stories were really about. They were never about the monsters. They were always about the survivors, about the fighters, about the ones who walked through that horror and they came out changed, but unbroken. And I started this podcast thinking that I needed to understand the darkness in people. But what I learned instead was how to recognize the light in Matt's 3 a.m. coffee runs, in the way that he fought for me, in all those small moments of kindness that terror tries to make us forget. So while this is my last true crime story, this is not my final chapter. Matt and I, we are writing a different kind of story now, starting with our wedding in Italy next year. And sometimes the best way to fight darkness is just to create more light. I can't wait to share those stories with you. Freedy Stockton's final podcast episode aired 3 months after her encounter with the Midnight Butcher. Today, Freedy and Matt run a small coffee shop in Tuscany. Local customers often ask about those unusual scars circling Freedy's wrists. She tells them they're like her wedding rings, proof that love is stronger than fear. Her old podcast episodes remain online, but she only posts one message: some stories deserve happy endings. For more scary horror stories, please share and subscribe, and share your experiences in the comments. Sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that remind us what we are fighting for. See you in the next video.